Up everyone, welcome to the Rugby League History channel. Tonight I'm going to be doing a video about State of Origin again, and tonight I'm going to be talking about passion, spirit and understanding and some other things that are thrown around about at Origin time. And in most cases, whenever people talk about passion, whenever they talk about spirit, whenever they talk about understanding, they always say that about Queensland. They always go, Queenslanders are more passionate. They've got more spirit, they've got more understanding when it comes to State of Origin. But for someone like me that's lived in Queensland and has also lived in New South Wales, and I've watched State of Origin in many different scenarios and circumstances, I can tell you that I'd say it's actually 50-50. It's not all one-way traffic. So that's the topic of tonight's video. Before I get into the video, if you have not yet subscribed, please consider subscribing. I'm up to 347 subscribers. Getting close to 350, trying to get to that figure by the end of the month. Your help would be greatly appreciated in getting me to 350. Getting back to this topic about passion though, now you could see in the early days of State of Origin that yes, Queensland was a bit more passionate, they were a bit more into the State of Origin scenario, you could see, because it all goes back to before State of Origin existed, when it was the Interstate series and it was based off residential rules and not particularly where you were born. So I think for many years Queensland were on the receiving end of some really nasty losses. They did lose 9 series in a row before State of Origin was born, and before that, even going back into the 60s and 50s, results weren't good for Queensland. And I think that they've never forgotten that. They've never forgotten that for many decades New South Wales dominated the Interstate series. And I think they used State of Origin as a clean slate, a way of saying, look, this is a brand new start for the state, this is a brand new concept, and we haven't forgotten how New South Wales has beaten us in the past, and we're going to go out there and we're going to win. And I think also there was probably some Queensland players that were playing for Sydney clubs at the time that thought that they didn't want to play for New South Wales, they wanted to play for Queensland where their heart was, and they finally got the chance to do that and they went out. And I think early on they did have more passion and spirit. In those first, you could see 2 or 3 years that State of Origin was around. Eventually, I think in the mid-80s, the New South Wales players and the state actually realised, you know, fuck, we're in a game here, like, you know, the other side is taking it seriously. We should start taking it seriously as well, because before the State of Origin series was born, I think interest in the Interstate series was at an all-time low in New South Wales. I mean, it had been moved to a midweek game, so the Sydney clubs weren't disturbed from playing on the weekend. And I think the last ever Interstate crowd at Leichhardt Oval only got about 3,000 people. Now, having lived in Queensland, having lived in New South Wales, I'm going to tell you that the lead up to a State of Origin match is the same. Albeit, as I mentioned last night in the video, that the New South Wales media talk a lot of shite and they say a lot of shite about the opposition, which is something that Queensland don't really do. So the lead up to the game's the same. Now, I've been in Queensland and New South Wales when they've lost a series, and I can tell you, going to work or going to school the next day is not a pleasant sight. It's a very depressing, very sad place to be. There's not a lot of talking, especially if you're a bit older and you go to the pub and your team loses the next day. It's a very long day at work, it's a very sore head. But if you win, I've been in Queensland when Queensland has won, I've been in New South Wales when New South Wales has won a game or a series, and it's just euphoria and the fans lap it up, and it's like the best thing in the world ever happened that their states won the State of Origin. Now, I've known plenty of Queenslanders in my life, and I've known plenty of people from New South Wales as well, and I can tell you both sides are just as passionate as the other. No one's more passionate than anyone. I'd say it's a dead 50-50. And for Queenslanders to come out and see that New South Wales and their fans are not as passionate, I have to really disagree with that. I think if you follow Nick from Australia, for instance, look how much it meant to him, that State of Origin, and seeing New South Wales lose. Look what he did to the cupboard. He put his whole fist through it. Like, I've seen some people that are not really invested in rugby league, that when I've lived in Queensland, that have watched games and they turn into a different beast when State of Origin's on. It's the same as for New South Wales. I've watched State of Origin in many different scenarios. When I was in Queensland, I've watched it at home, I've watched it with family, I watched it with friends, I watched it in a church. Yes, I used to be a member of a social club. We went and watched it at the church. I've watched it at barbecues, and then in New South Wales I've watched it at pubs, and I've watched it at home and all that keeper. And I can tell you that I've known someone and some people that at the pub that are generally quiet and reserved, and when that State of Origin turns on, they're a totally different person. They're intense. They want to win. Now, as opposed to understanding, whenever New South Wales lose a series, Queenslanders go, New South Wales just don't understand Origin, and that's why they don't win. But they must have understood it in certain parts. If in the 1990s, so between 1990 and 1998, they won 6 series, and then in the early 2000s, they won 3 in a row. So I think in certain scenarios they do understand Origin, because if they didn't understand Origin, they would never win any series whatsoever. There's also talk about culture. Some people see that the Queensland culture is better than the New South Wales culture. I'd have to disagree with that as well. I'd say both Queensland and New South Wales have good cultures. If you listen to some of the players from the 1990s or earlier in the New South Wales, when they used to actually go out on the lash and have a drink and all that, some of the stories and some of the mateship and camaraderie that come out of that, I would have wanted to be a part of that. It sounded like a good culture. And the same with Queensland, they had the same sort of thing, you know. They go out on the lash, they have a few drinks, they get up to a bit of caper, a bit of shenanigans and all that. But now with today's game, it's a bit more professional, and everyone's not on the drink, and they're training and they're doing the media commitments and all that. But back in the day, that's how it was. And I think New South Wales has a good culture. I think if I was to say one thing about New South Wales that they do probably as good as Queensland, is that they historically, and as it happened in this series as well, they don't pick players in the correct positions. Like, see for instance, Jack Whiten, he's the Dally M Player of the Year, and he did that at 5'8". Where do they put him? They put him in the centre. Why is he being put in the centre for? Queensland don't really do that. They pick players in the position that they play for their club. Another thing about New South Wales I'd probably see is that when they do lose, or when they have lost in the past, they're very cutthroat with the players. If you're a New South Wales player and you don't do well, you're pretty much cut and you're excommunicated from the side. And sometimes you never ever get a second chance. Like, you look at the likes of Adam Reynolds, or you look at people like Todd Carney or someone like that. They never got another go after they were part of the losing series. Whereas with Queensland, okay, yes, they have cut some players in the past, but generally they pick and they stick. And when New South Wales won 3 series in a row in the early 2000s, Queensland pretty much kept the same team every year. Even though they lost 3 in a row, they still had the same team. Another thing that Queenslanders and other people like to see is that they have better fans and they get behind their team more. Well, I'd have to disagree with that as well, because for 8 years in a row, Queensland dominated State of Origin. They won every series, 8 in a row. But every year when the game was being played in New South Wales still had a capacity crowd. They still had 83,000 people there chanting New South Wales, New South Wales. Even in some series that I used to watch, before the series began, you could tell that New South Wales probably weren't going to win. I mean, I think there was one series where they had Nathan Nerrod on one wing and they had James McManus on the other wing, and then when you looked at the Queensland side, they had Thurston and Cronk, Slater, Hodges. They had pretty much the Australian team as well. I think every year in those 8 years, Queensland would have about 11 or 12 players out of the 17 picked. But the New South Wales fans in that whole 8 year, they never lost interest in State of Origin. They never gave up, especially in Sydney. All those years that I lived in Sydney, every year, even when it was getting the 5 and 6 in a row, the media would still say, "Come on, we can do this," and the fans would still flock to the games, and there was no let up from the fans, and they never gave in, and eventually in 2014 they broke the curse, you could say, or they broke the streak. There's also talk about New South Wales doesn't have passionate players. They don't have players that want to be there. But I have to disagree with that as well. If you look at the past, you've had the likes of Tommy Radonicus, Steve Mortimer, Benny Elias, Peter Stalin, Eddingshausen, Laurie Daly, Ricky Stewart, Jeff Tuvey, Andrew Johns, Brad Fittler, Danny Badeiras, Jared Eden. You got some passionate New South Wales players there. I don't think any player that gets picked for New South Wales kind of goes, oh fuck, really? Do I have to play for New South Wales? I'd rather be out fishing or at the beach or something. I'd rather be doing something else. I got better things to do than play for New South Wales. I don't think that anyone that gets picked for New South Wales sees it as a bait and they're out like that. I think both Queensland and New South Wales players are passionate. Nobody goes out there to be a loser. Nobody goes out there to lose the series. And I think especially from fans, having lived in Queensland, having lived in New South Wales, everyone is glued to that television. Nobody wants to go to work or school the next day and be known as a loser. Everyone wants to win. And it's probably one of the most competitive games on the planet. I'd say it's, out of any code, out of any sport, State of Origin, when it comes to that feeling of winning and losing, there's such an emphasis placed on it, and it's such a pressure cooker environment, State of Origin. But anyways, that's me video where I want to just talk about passion, spirit, understanding when it comes to State of Origin, because I think for many years now Queensland have said we're more passionate, we understand it better, we've got a better culture, we've got better fans. But as I've said in this video tonight, I've countered that with some arguments of my own, because I think at the end of the day, in conclusion, both states are just as passionate as each other, and I think that's the way it always will be. So that's my video for tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure that you like the video and you comment if you did enjoy it. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'm going to get out of here now. St Helens is on tonight against Cattle and Dragons. I'm going to be looking forward to that game, as I'm guessing most of you out there will be. And I'll catch you in the next video. Alright, tatty bye.